One of the sad realities that we face with the medium of gaming is that we lose many experiences with the passage of time. Every game is released on a particular piece of hardware or even a specific operating system that isn't always compatible with our technically superior machines. Sometimes these games escape obscurity through official re-releases on new systems, while others resurface thanks to the hard work of fans with emulators or even fully original programs to run a game on modern hardware. Then there's some that aren't as lucky. We all know of those that go untranslated or games released on hard to emulate systems like the Saturn. However, with these, there's still a slight hope, no matter how small, that these could eventually become accessible. Sega may, if a weird cult does a ritual outside of their office, see a worthwhile business investment in re-releasing and maybe translating all of Sakura Wars. And even obscure games to the English-speaking audience still have a shot these days. We might wake up one day to find that some recently unemployed bilingual Taiwanese computer whiz suddenly translated every Legend of Sword and Fairy into English. No in-game mechanics of either series I mentioned have problems with modern hardware. There's still hope that many of these experiences can come back in an unaltered form through one means or another. But what about games that aren't so easy to do that with? First thing people think of with experiences you can't emulate easily at home are arcade games. Many of these involve racing wheels, dance pads, light guns, punching bags, even fucking maracas. Unique controls that, if popular enough, found their way back home. But what happens when that experience isn't popular enough to keep recreating? For example, Guitar Hero. Everyone knew about it and at least one friend had that guitar. While today, I don't think I've seen one of those plastic corner wasters used in person in 10 years. Due to how they operated, a huge portion of the Nintendo DS and Nintendo Wii's libraries fall into this category. Sure, you can replicate every part of those systems in some way, shape, or form with what we have today, but without those two pieces of hardware at their whole, many games require at least one inconvenient addition like occasional mouse usage or a complete rewire in official re-releases. Today I'm going to talk about a subseries of games where every single one of them has at least one quirk to them that makes playing them inconvenient. A series I want to talk about because I have fond memories of it, ones I share with my friends and family. Experiences not a lot of people share, and so I don't want it forgotten. That's why I'd like to remember them here, where people can find it. Chronicle the story of Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. In my next 3 videos, I'm going over the entire Crystal Chronicles series, a Final Fantasy spin-off series on Nintendo consoles consisting of 6 games. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, a dungeon crawler on GameCube, Ring of Fates and Echoes of Time, 2 more dungeon crawlers developed for DS, My Life as a King and My Life as a Dark Lord, a town builder and tower defense game on Nintendo's downloadable WiiWare service, and finally Crystal Bearers, a full disc-based game released on Wii that I can't throw an easy definition at. Originally, I planned on making one giant video, though I wrote a bit much and decided I'll cut this into parts. Crystal Chronicles 1 for part 1, the DS and WiiWare games in part 2, and part 3 will just be Crystal Bearers. Additionally, once I finish part 3, I'll make a supercut where I fix mistakes y'all point out and any inevitable editing flubs. Same thing I did with the Kingdom Hearts videos, though I wrote all of these together. So before you leave a comment on this part, think for a minute if a major topic is relevant in later games before saying I missed something. Very likely I moved it to later. Besides Crystal Chronicles 1, most of you can probably already guess 1 or 2 reasons why you can't easily experience the other 5 as intended today. Which is funny because the GameCube game is the least likely to ever properly have a remake with identical experience to the original, but we'll need to slow down a bit there. A majority of these, especially that first game, are very important to my childhood. Since Crystal Bearers came out in 2009, the series has gone mostly ignored by Square Enix. A few crossover appearances lately, but in terms of expanding the world of Crystal Chronicles, yeah, we've got nothing since then. Which is a shame because Crystal Chronicles has a very well-defined world. The stories bounce through 3, debatably 5 different eras, and all still feel like you can expand on them with another game. Hell, you can start at pretty much any of these too. It's not a fully continuous narrative like Kingdom Hearts where you'll be confused as hell starting at some points. You'll gain a fuller understanding of the geopolitical issues and historical significance of characters and locations by playing more of the series, so I would recommend going for all of it, but I guess we need to get into everything to reach that point. Given literally half my audience came from me talking about a different Final Fantasy offshoot franchise, I assume I don't need to go too in-depth with general Final Fantasy history. While I still have a lot to cover, going all the way back to pre-FF1 just isn't relevant today. So instead, we're going to right after Final Fantasy VI. One of the big Squaresoft moments everyone knows about, caused by Nintendo's fuck-up. In the 80s and early 90s, video game systems used cartridges. Simple squares kids popped into their systems, pressed play, and had instant gratification, exactly like what they did with their Bon Jovi cassette tapes. Until something crazy happened. In 1988, NEC released the PC Engine CD-ROM system, an extra box you hooked up to your PC Engine system that let it run full video games off of a CD-ROM, allowing for a significant increase in storage compared to a cartridge. However, due to systems themselves still having limitations for what they can read and render, a majority of games didn't suddenly improve their graphics or gameplay. Instead, they made use of the new storage for full motion video and music, which might not sound like much on the surface, but for turn-based or top-down action RPGs that focus mainly on world building and story, this made a world of difference. As a comparison, here's part of the PC-98 version of Ys 2's intro. Yeah, it's charming, beeps and boops, pretty bits on screen, but how about the PC Engine CD version? Yeah, undeniably a step up. I'd argue the best video game intro up to that point. Its use of moving anime characters and Redbook quality audio wasn't doable on cartridges. Stuff like this led to everyone, especially Japanese and European companies, to experiment with CDs. CDs were the future of gaming, and you'd have to be fucking stupid to not... Well, shit. Yeah, so Nintendo didn't do CDs for their upcoming system. You all knew that. Which for Squaresoft was a problem. Between mid-1987 and mid-1996, almost a decade, Squaresoft did not release a single game off of a Nintendo system. During that time, other console RPGs like Lunar, Ys, Shining Force CD, even eroge like Dragon Knight 2 got some sweet CD quality or at least MIDI quality music for part of, if not all, of their runtime. Even without CDs, Squaresoft kept the title of top dog of RPGs, but how long could they keep it without? They couldn't skip on CDs forever. They offered way too much. And I wanted to talk about this first because I know people in English communities tend to phrase it like Sony suddenly popped off with CD systems that impressed Square Enix, because in America it did kinda seem like FF7 came out of nowhere, but that removed so much of the middle. 5 years passed between Ys Book 1 and 2 on PC Engine and Final Fantasy VI. Square Enix had seen this shift for a long time before jumping ship. You really can't blame them for that falling out with Nintendo, especially after their godlike run with Sony, beginning with Snowball fucking won! And then they made like Final Fantasy VII or something. GameFAQs says it's possibly one of the most important Japanese RPGs of all time, whatever. Squaresoft and Sony made a shit ton of money from FF7, so they kept making games on PS1, many of which also made a shit ton of money. Enough where Squaresoft was riding one of the biggest waves fucking ever in gaming. So big that they were thinking of merging with their big rival Enix, the only company with a console RPG series bigger than them in Japan. Who knows, maybe after they release this Final Fantasy movie, they can get the merger going. Yeah, so here's one of Squaresoft's top 3 biggest blunders, Final Fantasy The Spirits Within. There's a whole video's worth of stuff to go over here that someone else has probably done, so we're not doing that today. What y'all really need to know is that Square and Columbia, a division of Sony, put a lot of moolah into Spirits Within over the course of 4 years. And once they saw the amount of money made back on it, yeah, I think I'd need to put some spirits within me after seeing that money too. Before and after inflation, this was the 4th biggest biggest box office bomb when it came out, and even today, it's still in the top 20 with inflation. Spirits Within put a hamper on Square's plans. They had to close their film studio, Enix didn't want to merge anymore, and Sony ended up buying a significant stock in the company to keep them from going out of business, which put pressure on Squaresoft to only produce console games for the PS2, which really wasn't a big problem. They already made all their games for PS1, and all their upcoming games were planned for PS2 or WonderSwan. In fact, one already came out on PS2 the year before.
The Bouncer.
So they went back to business as usual, right? Not exactly, they still had one little problem.
Square. Hello.
What?
You need money.
And hey, look over there. Nintendo said they're done with cartridges and will stop fucking up. Oh, you've gotta be fucking kidding me. Whatever, good enough. Square finally saw potential in putting games on Nintendo systems again, partially because the GBA was the only viable handheld globally. For their home consoles, it actually just meant a game for GameCube, the original Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles in 2004, which, due to the whole Sony thing, had a little snag. Going back to the Squaresoft interviews during the time of Sony's stock buyout, they kinda emphasized how they're not tied to any console manufacturer. Square's president said they could make games for whoever they want since Sony's only the second biggest shareholder in their company. They're just exclusive to Sony because they're the best on the market. Today we know that's a fucking lie, because to not have Sony worry about Square making a game for their competitor, Square literally made a shell company known as the Game Designers Studio, a company which Square, the corporate entity we've been talking about, had a 49% stock. While Kawazu Akitoshi, the director and producer of Square's Saga series, a longtime employee at the company, and now the producer of Crystal Chronicles, had a 51% stock in the company, meaning that technically, Kawazu owned the company. So rather than Squaresoft employees not working on PlayStation games, it was Kawazu's employees not working on PlayStation games. GD Studio only made Crystal Chronicles 1. Thanks to Final Fantasy X, Kingdom Hearts 1, and not developing another 3D World Runner, Square made enough profit to entice Enix for a merger, spawning the Square Enix we know today, which diminished Sony's stock in the company, removing their obligation to PlayStation they wouldn't admit, and thereby defeating the purpose of GD Studios. On paper, GD Studios merged with Taito after Square Enix acquired them, though I get the feeling that business as usual never looked any different before, during, or after the studio's existence. Besides which building they might have walked into, it was make Final Fantasy game this week, then make different Final Fantasy game next week. Something that's really clear when we looked at who worked on it. A lot of the Crystal Chronicles team consisted of employees that worked on Final Fantasy IX. Kazuhiko Aoki, Final Fantasy IX's event designer, which in basic terms means key player on the writing team, directed the first Crystal Chronicles, while IX's character designer Toshiyuki Itahana took that same role for a majority of the Crystal Chronicles series. As we'll see, Crystal Chronicles differs from IX in most of the game-related ways. It's not even turn-based, which is why you can comment before my video's done, but it's pretty clear the team's work on IX influenced Crystal Chronicles vibes, returning to the classic fantasy setting, putting crystals at the center of the story, and especially the aesthetic of the subseries as a whole feel like Final Fantasy IX, a game that was trying to feel like the ones on Nintendo. Get what I'm saying here? Having a bunch of the FF9 team work on the first Nintendo console Final Fantasy in nearly a decade is just a perfect planning choice. Back then, I thought it was to cement the high fantasy games as what would go on Nintendo consoles, while the sci-fi numbered games would stay on Sony. After all, 10-2 came out not long before on PS2, and from the start, the team said they wanted Crystal Chronicles to continue as a series alongside the numbered entries. It could have led to an interesting idea for console-specific branding. In fact, I think this is such a cool idea that I'm not going to link back to it for 2 months because I've broken this into 3 parts at a late moment in production. Plus, I used the buzzword. As much as I'd like to start talking about Crystal Chronicles with some profound thoughts about the game itself, looking back on my beautiful childhood memories, we gotta talk about these annoying childhood memories first. These things, the Game Boy Advance to GameCube link cables. A cable used for, connecting the Game Boy Advance to the GameCube. Not a whole lot of games made heavy use of it, and the ones that made small use of it made really small use of it. Most commonly, you used it for easily removable content like minigames in Billy Hatcher, or transferring your brother's OP Green Chaos Chow named Piccolo from Sonic Adventure 2 to Sonic Adventure 1 so you could unlock Metal Sonic. Most required a GBA slot empty, but a few could interact with GBA games as well. I'm sure most of y'all have at least seen clips of Pokemon Coliseum and XD where you bring your ADV Mons onto the big screen, and for all 10 of you that owned it, you could store them in Pokemon Box. However, you can still have a full experience from Colosseum and XD without the link cables. They're full RPGs on their own, so nothing feels lacking in the games I've mentioned if you don't have a link cable. Then there's the 3 where you need a link cable for the intended experience: Pac-Man vs, Zelda 4 Swords Adventures, and Crystal Chronicles. Pac-Man vs only required 1 GBA and 1 link cable for a player to run as Pac-Man through the mazes to gain points, while up to 3 other players looked for him on the big screen as ghosts. If a ghost caught Pac-Man, they'd then trade their controller to use Pac-Man on the GBA. Whoever achieved the highest score as Pac-Man won, and whoever survived strangulation after constantly crossing chords didn't lose. A neat twist on the Pac-Man formula that got the whole party involved. To my knowledge, it only came as a bonus disc with Pac-Man World 2, so you still had a full experience if you lacked a cable or Game Boy. While for 4 Swords and Crystal Chronicles, these two are designed and sold completely with the Game Boys in mind. Only way to use a traditional controller is in single player mode, that I don't recommend. Nintendo and Squaresoft designed both primarily for multiplayer, and you lose a little something by playing on your own. You need 3 friends, 1 GameCube, 1 game disc, 1 Game Boy each, 1 GBA to GameCube link cable each, and realistically, at least 1 Game Boy charger on standby to get the intended play method. Back in the day when we were like 8, that wasn't happening. For a timeline on how I recall things going, on one of my twin brother's birthdays, we got 4 Swords Adventure. My brother really loved Zelda, so the promise of a multiplayer Zelda seemed neat. Obviously, us and the grandfather that bought it for us didn't know about the Game Boy thing, so it ended up where I just watched him play for a few months on single player. 4 Swords did come with a official Nintendo link cable, but you need 2 for 2-player mode. Eventually, I'm guessing with some Christmas money, because the price tag says $15, one of us bought Crystal Chronicles for GameCube with a cheapo, shitty third-party link cable. And this is how we initially played 2-player mode for both. For more players, that's where it got difficult. Yeah, sure, everyone had a GBA back then. You needed it for Pokemon, and you couldn't skip Pokemon. But the link cable, I knew only one person that had one, and thankfully it was my brother, cousin, and I's shared bestie, who owned exactly 1 GBA link cable. Because of that, he'd occasionally bring over the goods so we could play Crystal Chronicles and 4 Swords, while his little brother was forced to watch us in the corner. As you can tell, setting this up took a lot. Unlike Smash Bros, Mario Kart, or just playing outside as kids do, we needed prep to play these. And obviously we, young kids, didn't have cell phones in 2005, meaning we'd need to plan it out in advance at school or the weekend prior. And once we did get it going, that had hassles sometimes as well. The official Nintendo link cables don't let you charge while connected to the GameCube, but the single third-party one did. So if 2 people need to charge at the same time, then you're kind of forced to take a break. A pretty common occurrence because obviously little kids didn't think to have their GBAs charged at all times, and Lord forbid they run out of charge mid-stage. This pain in the ass setup and the fact that I got to experience it while still in my formative years is part of why I feel a need to make this video. Few people want to go through this pain in the ass, while even fewer people I've heard from making content like myself actually got to play this back in the day. I mean, I've still never gotten to play the whole game in 4-player mode. Until sometime in high school when I had my own money, could drive, and knew how eBay worked, I only had the 2 cables. So once I impulsively bought 2 more, getting a group together for all 4 to play FFCC the whole way wasn't realistic. The Wii U and 3DS were both out for a while and everyone was getting busier, so if we got together, we never had 4 GBAs ready or the time for a 15 to 20 hour RPG. And after the remaster messed up the multiplayer, more on that later, I kinda gave up on sharing this original journey with new friends. Until the guys and gals at Dolphin have recently, meaning about 2 years ago, I'm usually slow to this stuff, integrated GBA emulation and netplay into their GameCube emulator. Meaning that for the first time in over a decade, I can share an experience close to my heart in a manner only slightly less optimal than the original release. Crystal Chronicles, especially this first one, succeeds at compared to other FFs, it's including you and your friends into the world it crafted. At the beginning, you see a beautiful intro, one of the best in FF history, that shows where you begin. A small town filled with citizens of different tribes, a crystal in the center, and the heroes of our journey looking ready to discover the outside world. You and your friends discover the damp plains, dry deserts, and many more biomes that you'll record in your caravan's journal, known as the Crystal Chronicle. For this video, I played the original game twice. First with my buddy Flaffy, linked to his channel below, he does some gameplay videos, who never played the game since we only met online a few years ago, and a second time with my brother Bryce, who's played Crystal Chronicles even more than me. I didn't do a 3 or 4 player run because scheduling that would have been a nightmare, and no single player run because I think enough people covered that when the remaster came out. I watched my brother run through the remaster by himself recently, and he gave me some notes I'll share about one player when I talk about the remaster, but know that those are mostly gonna be his words. Now, I have a few reasons for playing it twice. First, there's 4 tribes in the Crystal Chronicles series. A perfectly well-rounded full team would include 1 player for each tribe, but since 4 player was off the table, I needed 2 playthroughs to get footage of all 4. Plus, some minor netplay and OBS issues had some fuzzy looking or static footage, and I wanted a better percentage of clean footage. When you start, you give your town a name, something to make your experience feel more unique. You and your pals know each other IRL, so if your avatars come from the same town, then they're already connected as well. For this video, I planned on going with the default name Tipa. After all, I am a professional man making professional videos. Honestly, I didn't think the game would allow that. So we hail from the village of Tits, all caps, at the bottom of Tipa, unchanged, Peninsula, a fantasy town populated with the town elder Roland, his wife, up to 8 player-made characters that journey on a caravan, random guys that only show up for parties, and your player 8's family, a mom, a dad, and 2 siblings for each character you make. So let's talk about character creation. First, you pick the tribe. You've got 4, the Lilties, Selkies, Ukes, and Clavats. Lilties are proud, physical attackers from an imperial kingdom, and look like short little onion dudes. The magic-focused Ukes are a mysterious bunch with both metallic and beastly parts to them. The free-spirited Selkies have the fastest charge attacks and combos to represent their thieving tendencies, and the normal Clavats are your standard all-around types. We'll return to all 4 in both story and gameplay. For first-time players on single player, I'd recommend using a Clavat or Selkie. Ukes and Lilties focus extremely on magic or physical attacks respectively, so parts where you absolutely need to use magic are rough for Lilties, while the same problem arises for Ukes in physical situations. Then in multiplayer mode, just try to have a varied team. Due to my Tits Village pride, I chose a female Selkie on the first run, while Flaffy went with a Uke because he thought they looked cool, which by extension meant my brother and I picked a Clavat and Liltie respectively for run 2. You choose one of 8 designs per tribe, and your families trade in the village, which I think is a pretty cool way for making your character and caravan feel unique. Even if you played twice as a Clavat, there's 7 other designs you can use, or professions your parent could have. Which, I know, that's not a whole lot when MMOs like Phantasy Star, World of Warcraft, and even Final Fantasy's own FF11 had the full character creation going on, but I don't think that was really needed here. It's enough to feel unique, and you know at least one friend would have taken 20 minutes to design a character and waste everyone's GBA battery life if they had a robust character builder. Your family's profession then affects what you can buy in town and what gifts you receive from them as you progress, with even the ability to go to the shops of unused caravaner families, which makes filling your party with dummy characters a pretty good idea. However, unless you're going for the ultimate weapons, they don't affect gameplay much. Right now, they impact your feelings, as at the beginning, every member of your party says goodbye to their family and receives some sagely guidance from Roland about their new journey. As today, these young men and women embark on the most important job in all of Tits Village. They must travel the land to find an energy source for the town's crystal so it can keep the town safe for another year from the miasma. Crystal Chronicles' world is not a safe one. Sometime, long before anyone alive can remember, a strange miasma overtook the land. A miasma that poisons the 4 tribes if they breathe it in too long. Only monsters like goblins, orcs, and moogles can survive in the miasma without protection, while humans rely on the power of the crystals to keep themselves safe. These crystals, found in every town, cast a large barrier around the miasma so they can continue to farm, fish, dance, and breathe with their loved ones. However, these crystals can only store so much power, which is why every year a caravan is sent out to collect what's known as the myrrh from myrrh trees, a mysterious liquid that refuels crystals back home. And to survive outside of the town crystal's security, the caravan is given one small crystal on top of the bucket to hold the mirror, which produces a small shield just big enough for the caravan. Your caravan needs to find 3 myrrh trees per year to fill up the chalice so your family can breathe air for another year. You may see why this job is important. So important that the societies within Crystal Chronicles have wrapped their whole lives around it. So choosing how to start talking about the story here is a little tough. Crystal Chronicles doesn't portray its narrative 100% linearly like most Final Fantasy games. Instead, it's an at-your-own-pace journey where you're nudged in certain directions occasionally. Besides which dungeons you start at, you discover whichever part of the world you and your friends want whenever, and finish once you all feel ready to end the journey. You choose if you want to talk around town to learn of villagers' lifestyles and maybe get some lore info, or when and which dungeons to enter so you can retrieve myrrh. You can slow down to gain new equipment or speed up to challenge harder enemies. Only thing you need to do is complete 3 dungeons in a year with no in-game time limit, meaning it's not a rush. We do have a primary quest outside of finding myrrh that results in final boss and credits, but going straight for that isn't the point. You have an infinite, or at least a stupidly high, number of years that you should cherish, so ending the journey now would be a waste. Instead, you should spend that time discovering the world. Every part of Crystal Chronicles' geography, dungeon placement, and town livelihoods tell us something about the world in this game's era, and the eras of later games. It's preparing to build upon itself with citizens working towards a brighter future, while telling tales that have muddied over the years. A way to remember the past and look forward. To understand the world today, I think the best way to start is by looking at the map. Due to large mountains and how the water flows from the northern lake to the south, the main landmass is split into 3 uneven parts with some extra islands to the south. And even on the 3 main parts, heavy streams of miasma only caravanners with their crystals can pass isolates the land further into 7 pieces, which for these civilians of Tits Village, isolates them from anyone not coming from the sea. Not only are the caravanners seeing the outside world for the first time, they're leaving to see a world that might not match the stories they're told. Stories of the outside world from trusted elder caravanners or the few merchants that might have passed their village are mixed with myths and legends passed down for generations to construct fears and expectations about each location. An expectation narrated to us by a caravan member every time you enter a dungeon. Some of the narrations tell of a factual truth that the caravaner is sure of, normally relating to the present, while others recount tales of the past heard as a child. Both types of narrations develop the world and the 4 tribes. I think a good starting example is the Mine of Cthulhu. During your first year of caravanning, there's only 2 sections of the map you can traverse with 3 dungeons total, including the mine, meaning you have to visit here near the start of your journey. And the reason for that is because it's one of the most important for explaining the world to us. The narrator tells how when the grandfather of her grandfather's grandfather was a child, so ballpark of 150 years ago, no one challenged the might of the Lilti Empire. The Liltis used these mines to procure iron, which they forged into weapons used to subjugate the other tribes. Liltis ruled as an imperial monarchy similar to Spain or England that decided who lived where and worked for who. However, once the mines ran out of iron, the Liltis lacked a way to stay in power, ending their conquest and leaving the mines open for monsters. This single narration subtly explains what the world is today. Each tribe, their roles in society, and even much of the dungeons are still a reflection of how the tribes are working together after an imperial power lost its grip. Getting into the tribes themselves, the Liltis were, and to a certain extent still are, the strongest force in the land. Once a powerful empire taking land by force, now falling from their status. Cooperating with the other tribes out of necessity. The mines ran out, and if you just look outside, there's still some fucking poison. They're not gonna get through it on their own. Despite that, we still get a feel for their power in both their high attack stat during gameplay, political standing, and their normally arrogant attitudes. From a political standpoint, we can see that most when looking looking east of the Jagon River, where a majority of Crystal Chronicles inhabitants live, including you. From the south to the north, there's 3 villages: Tits at the bottom, Mars Pass in the middle, and Alphateria at the top. Obviously, you start at Tits Village, a small town the game manual says mostly consists of Clavats, though actually the population reflects your choice of tribe. For the sake of lore discussion, let's just pretend it's 50% Clavat, 50% the rest. Tits is an equal opportunity village where everyone has a role that's equally relied upon. Doesn't matter the tribe, someone's a fisherman, someone's a blacksmith, someone's a caravaner. Everyone serves a purpose. Then, once you move north in the middle of year 1, you'll find another town called Mars Pass next to the mines. This town, while consisting of about half Clavat, is considered part of the Lilti Empire. Due to the placement next to the mines, we can assume that the Liltis here descended from those who worked at the mines. Working class Liltis live in Mars Pass, with Clavat settlers as well. Then, in year 2, you move to the northernmost part of the land, Alphateria, the Lilti capital. This is the biggest city in Crystal Chronicles, with a huge castle, multi-level roads, the biggest crystal, Lilti royalty that's more relevant in my life as a Dark Lord, and many knights keeping it safe. An amazing city that isn't entirely perfect. It's clear from the population that there's some kind of hierarchy. Only a few non-Liltis live here, giving the idea that other tribes don't integrate as easily. Not that they're facing harsh prejudice in Alphateria, just that they don't have the same privileges as the Liltis. The Liltis built up this city after hundreds of years in rule, and as such, descendants of those ruling Liltis are privy to generational wealth other tribes won't have by moving here. Like, the only Selkie you meet here is a merchant that switches between towns. Alphateria is the final city of the strong and proud Lilti Empire, representing what they used to be across the whole land, while everything next to it implies a prosperous past that they couldn't keep going. For example, there's a large town right next to Alphateria known as Tita. This is the only dungeon that's 100% mandatory to enter in year 2. Tita's a large agrarian village mainly composed of farmland. Given the placement, perhaps the urban Alphaterians traded with the agrarian Tita for crops and meat. That is, until the Tita caravan failed their responsibility. One year, perhaps not too long ago, Tita lost the power of the crystal, allowing the miasma and monsters to kill the residents. This shows us the power of the miasma. Even a farming town right next to the strongest city in the land couldn't survive this mysterious force if they don't have their myrrh, showing us a weakness in the Lilti Empire and telling you, the player, don't fuck this up. Going from your safe home to some basic dungeons to the mines to Alphateria to Tita, basically the only mandatory stops unrelated to the ending, make sure that you see the rise and fall of the Liltis, the strongest power in the world within these first 2 years. If someone takes just one bad step, like losing your iron mines or not having a caravan come home, then you will suffer to the miasma. It affects everyone, and in the following years we'll see how it and the wars shaped the other tribes. Over here we find Shella, the village of the Ukes, where a majority of them live. A village that's really difficult to reach. First, you need to pass a miasma stream, which for a Tits villager would be their third one. Then, if you're not a Uke, you need what's called the Mark of Shella for the gatekeeper to create a magic bridge for you. An item you can only find in another dungeon next to Shella. So already difficult for you to get into today, so now imagine 150 years ago when the Lilti Empire wanted it. That made a full-scale military invasion nearly impossible. And the final straw that made it not happening is the Uke tribe's magic. Remember when I mentioned how they have the highest magic stat? Well, that's integrated into their story as well, because they're so good at magic that Iron and more men can't just get into their fortified village. Then, one look at the Ukes, and you can tell that these dudes have the most out there design of the 4. Helmets for heads, beastly limbs, bat wings for men, angel wings for women, metal pointy chesticles. This look shrouds the Ukes in mystery. For Crystal Chronicles 1, some tales say that they have a head under their helmets, while others say they're actually just souls inhabiting suits they created with magic. If the latter, then perhaps the souls only wanted to design what they think would be an optimal body. However, the Ukes keep that secret completely between themselves, who mostly live in their secluded village. A village that you can't enter until year 3. Going to Shella in year 3 keeps the mystery of their society intact until you've already gotten a grasp on the Lilties. Because even if the Ukes weren't conquered by the Lilties, they're still clearly affected by their rule. Due to Shella's placement with mountains to the north, rough water to the south, and Alphateria to the east, they couldn't really leave their village without fear of a Liltie attack. Only their magic city kept them safe, and it seems as though their expansion outwards only began after the Liltie started to fall. Leaving Shella seems like a new idea to them, which might be why not a lot of them want to leave much. Most Ukes are content with studying magic in their village, and those who want to explore outside join the caravans. Only a few Ukes live in other villages, with I guess the most moving to Alphateria because of its size and direct proximity to Shella, or your home village. Due to the minimal Uke emigration from Shella, other tribes have propped up Shella and the Ukes as a wise species and village, people you find to gain wisdom. Shella helps you master magic or study world issues. It's why the only non-Ukes that dare to take the trek to Shella are motivated students. Moving on to the Selkies, they're the most free-spirited and individualistic of the four. They normally hang around in small groups, not staying in any one place, taking jobs as thieves or merchants living off the land, wearing animal furs, letting out their hair, keeping bountiful grapefruits to themselves. They're not the same as the other tribes that stay in their place due to fear of the miasma. However, it's implied and basically confirmed with the next game that they didn't always live like this. Before, they lived in harmony with the other tribes. That is, until they lost their ancestral home. Once they lost it, they had to take up the nomadic lifestyle. And since the other tribes started to persecute them for their individualism and fear that they might get robbed, they spent years searching for a new place to live since the other tribes didn't accept them into their villages. Now, they never say outright what happened to their ancestral home or when they were persecuted, but I do have a theory that I can't get to until I talk about Ring of Fates and Echoes of Time, so hey, look out for next time. As they needed their own colony with a crystal to fend off miasma, they traveled far out to the small desert island Linari. Here, the Selkies have set up their only village, a small port town called Liuda. While they still share a lot with each other, the Selkies trust each other the least of any of the four tribes. And I find their independence interesting in the world of Crystal Chronicles. Most tribes and towns place emphasis on the community to do their part, i.e. caravanning and supporting caravanners to not die from miasma, while Selkies don't follow that. Living on your own as a thief and not having a permanent home are extremely dangerous choices in this time. Personally, I could not imagine doing that. But when you think of their past persecution, why would they want to fit in? Selkies live life to the fullest despite the miasma, another force trying to persecute them. Because of that, it makes sense why only a few are willing to integrate into other societies. Now for the Clavats, they're kind of the most normal tribe. Completely average build, cleanish cut hair, normal clothes, follows the rules, and get along with everyone. They're an agrarian tribe that farm the fields, milk the bearded cows, and care for pow-pow mooses, the blue guys that pull your caravan. As described in the manual, Clavats are a tribe of unity and friendship. They are gentle by nature and dislike conflict. Because of that, they didn't really get too fucked over by Lilties. They integrated themselves into their culture the best, and today, now that the power struggles subsided, Clavats are the ones that agree the most with everyone. Selkies most commonly move to Clavat villages. Mars Pass, a Liltie town, is about half populated with Clavats, and the Ukes from Shella work closely with Clavats by managing a sluice that helps Clavation trade and farming. A pretty important aspect for the entirety of the world, actually. The only pure Clavation village we go to is the Fields of Foom, a farming town right in the middle of the world map on the west side of the Jagon River. It's not totally clear when they set up the town, so I'm mainly theorizing here, but it probably wasn't too long ago. Due to its placement right by the river, they have the best trading routes of anyone. Go east to the Lilties in Mars Pass, and south of the water to reach the Selkies in Liuda. I thought at first that maybe this kept the Clavats liked during war times, but this may more so be evidence of how the tribes came together after the war. You see, the sluice made by the Ukes brings water to the entire Jagon River. Before it existed, travel between the two land masses was either completely cut off or at least difficult for many years. Now that sluice isn't actually in Shella. It's directly next to it in a monster-infested place called Veolu Sluice. Ukes couldn't set up a sluice there properly until after the Liltie War ended, at which point the Lilties could make it safe to work and travel there by fighting monsters while Ukes set it up. It's evidence of teamwork to keep every tribe safe. We also have an implication that perhaps Tita was the Clavation farming village before the Fields of Foom, one that the Alphatarian Lilties protected due to its placement. That part's kind of my own theory though, based on how many farms are in Tita. Either way, Clavat's simple farm life and agreeable attitude keeps the other tribes fed and happy, and their ease to like is probably why they get top billing and marketing. As in, the central character in every Crystal Chronicles game is Clavat, and even in the ones that lack a dedicated protagonist such as this one, they usually put a Clavat front and center. Front of the manual has a female Clavat, box art has a Clavat in the center of the 4, judging by the few scans I can find of the untranslated manga adaptation, the Clavat was the lead there, and even today on the few times when the original Crystal Chronicles has crossover representation, they feature the cowlit Clavat design under the name Kieran. And you know, I can't blame them, Clavats are kinda just the all-around normal looking dudes that'll get someone interested. Due to how front and center they are, I guess it also tells single players that maybe this is who you should go with since they're the most balanced. Moving on, I've mentioned how much history this world has, but I think it's important to stress how the current era really is not an important one. We don't have any ongoing wars or grand narrative besides, damn, there's miasma, which has existed long enough for people to get somewhat used to it. Society has normalized miasma and caravanning for myrrh. Because of that, you yourself, the caravaner, have a normal old job. You're no different from a trucker going state to state. Besides your village, people don't think twice about your journey. Because to everyone else, your journey is not special. The special part is the memories you make with your caravan and the people you meet along the way, who for the most part are in the same situation as you. I think it helps disconnect it from mainline FFs like 2 or 4, where you've got the fully named characters on a clear-cut quest from the beginning to save the world, and especially sets it apart from 3, 5, or 13, where the heroes are chosen by the crystals. Every action you take, besides the very end, and we'll get there, is purely to help your town and enrich your personal journey. You're no one special, but you are special to those that are part of your journey. In the grand scheme, you just gotta do your job, which means crawling through dungeons. Dungeon crawling, that's the main thing you do. In terms of the basic mechanics in dungeons, Crystal Chronicles is a by-the-books dungeon crawler. Every year, you start at the bottom of Tipa Peninsula on the world map, and you caravan to 3 dungeons each year to get your myrrh. Said world map is on a path comparable to Mario World, so you are eventually aware of every location without any confusion. On the way to those dungeons, you can also go to towns, ports to cross water, and try to cross the miasma streams I mentioned earlier. However, the miasma streams require your crystal to align with one of the 4 classic elements to pass, which you can only change by going into a dungeon containing that element, or standing next to it on the map after beating it once before. So unless your crystal aligns with the stream, you're locked into exploring what you can. A design used to make sure you go to the easier dungeons first, which I'm gonna talk about right now, and keep in mind, I'm talking about these in multiplayer. I'm not gonna talk about the differences in single player until near the end. Once you enter a dungeon, you get the narration at the beginning, a safe chance for everyone to organize their equipment where monsters can't hurt you, and then you start your top-down action RPG. To start talking about the gameplay, I think it's best we think about the controller. Crystal Chronicles is designed with a Game Boy Advance in mind as the controller. This means they had to design every action in this console RPG like it's on a handheld, giving us a combat system that's kinda comparable to what Kingdom Hearts has. Turn-based menu combat translated to real time. Rather than tying every action to an input, you have a single input tied to a menu system. Right next to each player's health, you have the current command. Use the bumpers to select your command, press A to enact the command, and there you go, half the buttons used. It's a system that even a little kid can figure out. It frees up the B button for context-sensitive actions like picking stuff up. You can use start to pause the game for everyone, and select for an individual player to switch to controlling their menus on the GBA screen. Which, yeah, there's the reason you need these pricey wires. We get the pretty 3D graphics on the big screen and 2D menus, including your map, on the bottom screen. These menus are the main reason why Crystal Chronicles 1 has never had an official release that maintains Crystal Chronicles' original integrity, and why even fans have taken so long to get an unofficial close approximation going on emulators. Whenever you start a level, the first thing a player sees on their GBA is one of their 4 radars which shuffle between players every time you change rooms. In 2-player mode, one player gets a mini-map of the dungeon while the other gets a radar telling you where enemies are. Then in 3 or 4-player mode, they throw a treasure radar and an enemy information sheet into the mix. Since both my runs were in 2-player, I don't have any of that recorded, but man, could this cause some fights back in the day. Since each player had only one of the radars on GBAs, you had to have some trust in the other players. You can't screen peek because most likely than not, y'all are sitting too far for you to add another 2.9-inch screen to your line of sight. And in 3-player mode especially, you'd need to trust that they even have the radar they said. One radar goes unused in 3-player mode, so a dude with the chest radar might attempt to get a slightly off-screen chest while telling y'all he has the enemy radar. However, in 2-player mode and in the ways I played today, that wasn't an issue. When playing with Flaffy on Dolphin's netplay, we both had each other's GBA screens next to each other, mainly for my own OBS recording purposes, while in the second run with my brother, we put both of our GBA screens on my laptop that had an HDMI hooked up to the TV screen where the main game window happened. So unless you're doing Dolphin netplay in bro code that you won't look at each other's windows, you can't really keep secrets from the other players anymore. Which kinda sucks because I can't think of many co-op games at the time that gave you this choice. Do you want to cooperate super closely, or do you want to keep some information from your friends? With that said, Crystal Chronicles mainly wants you to choose cooperation over competition, like even more than its only contemporary Four Swords Adventures, so losing the ability to withhold information from your dearly beloved friends doesn't entice me to write off playing on an emulator. Still not optimal, but how many of you in the comments really want to be buying all the bullshit you need to play it legitimately? Anyways, there's also 9 other menu options on the GBA screen. And honestly, I think they could have lowered this number. 7 of those 9 have one piece of information, like what equipment is currently on or how much money you have, which I think they could have fused with the normal item menu. A majority of them are pretty self-explanatory, like open up the menu and it's like, oh, this says money, I wonder what that fucking does. So I'm just gonna talk about a few that you use the most. First off, the command list menu. When you open this up the first time, you're going to see 4 slots. The first 2 say attack and defend, they will never change, while the second 2 are open. On those 2 slots, you get to choose if you put down a magic spell, some food, a phoenix down, another weapon, whatever you want, and whatever's there decides your other options during the main game. Think of it kind of like the deck system from Birth by Sleep or Dream Drop Distance. You are equipping your actions, and similar to those Kingdom Hearts games, as you progress, you'll have more command slots, up to 6 depending on what upgrades you get. Depending on which tribe you choose also kind of dictates how many you really need. If you're a Lil T who is mainly just doing normal physical attacks, you don't need much more than about 2 extra. Then the other menu you'll be using a lot is the item menu, which, you know, it's your inventory. On the surface, there's nothing special about it, except that everyone has their own separate, limited inventory, and they get to choose whether to keep, sell, or even trade items with other players. Having this item and command management on the small screen is definitely the best part of having the Game Boys. Yeah, it's a tad annoying to look at the screen, but imagine if you had to perform your item management on the TV screen. Anytime someone needs to equip another Phoenix down or change magic spells, you would need to pause the game or maybe take up a portion of the screen. And I don't see that as a good choice. Using the GBAs instead definitely helps keep your flow. At least with those 3 menus, the other 7, I find them more cumbersome than anything, but you really only open those in towns, so no point in getting into it. Crystal Chronicles 1 has 13 dungeons of various length that you can travel between at any time, plus the final dungeon that ends the game if you beat it, like final dungeons do. Inside these dungeons, you want to carry your chalice to the end to defeat the boss, who protects the merchant that gives you your myrrh. On the way, you look out for enemies, treasure, magic spells, and carry your chalice. Said chalice is the key focus for your party. To keep miasma away, your chalice has a tiny crystal creating a protective barrier. If you walk outside of the barrier, you take damage. Square likely put this in the game to remove any need for the screen to stretch when you move too far from each other. Center the camera on the chalice, and now you don't need to worry. A neat mechanic that inspires teamwork. You and your team support the chalice, which represents the salvation of your village, your entire community that you and your party share. If one of you works apart from the team, you don't just hurt them, you kill your little sister as well. One rogue element dying leads to a mutually assured defeat. Especially true in my run with with Fluffy where he focused on support, while I dealt with the up-close fighting. If he died when I didn't have a Phoenix down, I usually had to throw in the towel. I have never played a game with a mechanic quite like that Chalice. I guess you can compare it to a capture the flag or capture the base mode in something like Halo or Star Wars Battlefront, but those are purely competitive games. Everyone has their own screen or split screen with their own goals in mind. While with Crystal Chronicles, it's the core focus of your offline shared screen experience. I guess one little problem with it is someone needs to carry the Chalice at all times, and the one carrying it walks slower than everyone else. Depending how you feel, this might decide how you feel about Crystal Chronicles as a whole. It slows the experience down a lot, especially in longer dungeons. In 4-player mode, you can keep your pace going by relegating one guy to holding the Chalice while the other 3 deal with small enemies, but you can't really do that with less players. Once the player to enemy ratio reaches a certain point, you need to drop the Chalice. And at 2-player mode, that number can even mean one big enemy. It's a problem that while I and my brother and my childhood friends like, it made Flaffy not a big fan of the game. Like, he said he fucking hated it when we first finished, though I think if I asked him today, he'd have cooled off on it. With a bit of coordination, I don't think it's that big of a detriment. I'd say everything relating to the Chalice inspires more cooperation than friction between the players. In fact, on my run with my brother, we barely thought about it at all. After one fight I held it, after a second fight he held it, we didn't need to verbalize it unless we had a weird situation. Crystal Chronicles has a fairly simple combat system once you figure out the command menu. First off, each tribe has a weapon type specific to them. Lavots get swords, Ukes hammers, Lilities spears, and Selkies get rackets, immediately giving a uniqueness to each, as though their tribes mastered and passed on the knowledge of these weapons. Each have a standard 3-hit melee combo, charged focus attacks, and magic spells. The latter two having a neat way of working. When you hold down the A button, a little reticle appears on screen. A reticle you line up with an enemy for any kind of attack, or on your partner for supports like Cure. Almost every weapon has their own version of the focus attack, with some leading to a large dash attack, others spewing ranged fireballs, and the higher leveled ones might even just give you 2 ranged attacks. There's a lot to test out here, and it might lead to even some weapon with technically higher stats not working as well for you because of a worse focus attack. While with the magic, you have 6 different spells: Fire, Blizzard, and Thunder for offense, then Cure, Clear, and Raise for support. The support spells work the same as in mainline Final Fantasies, which for those that don't know means Cure to heal, Raise for resurrection, and Clear to get rid of status ailments. While offensive moves work similar to how you'd know them, but now they can also cause status ailments. Fire causes a burn which slowly depletes health and halves your defense, Thunder paralyzes someone, and Blizzard freezes an enemy or you and causes you to take double damage. So it's more like Pokemon status ailments than Final Fantasies. Something I especially thought when seeing burn, since the half defense is kinda like the half attack you get in Pokemon. The 6 spells on their own aren't gonna be too different for a typical Final Fantasy player. The unique part is how you get them. Rather than locking it onto your moveset like magic skills in most RPGs, you need to find these Magicite orbs within each dungeon. Orbs which, every time you leave a dungeon, you lose. So you may find Fire and Raise at the start of one dungeon, cast it infinitely for the crawl, and then you'll need to find a Fire and Raise Magicite again in the following dungeon. This adds a few things you need to worry about. First and foremost, you want Cure as soon as possible. Unless you play at a terribly boring speed, someone's gonna take hits. And thankfully, you can usually find Cure at the start of a dungeon. For both of my runs, Flaffy and Bryce took over the curing roles since I was primarily the physical attacker in each, which meant they immediately had a slot used up. And as a Uke, Flaffy also really needed to find attack magic as soon as possible, as a Uke inflicts way more magic damage than they do physical damage, which used both of his base slots by the first dungeon, deciding his role early on. Flaffy stayed in the back to cast attack spells and heal, while I dealt with the enemies head on. Now, in a 2-player run where only one of you focuses on magic, finding Magicite and deciding who holds on to it isn't a huge deal. Let the magic guy get it first, and have the non-magic guy hold one spell for a reason I'll get to. Once you're up to 3 players, you're gonna need some coordination to share. I'd recommend giving attack magic to a Uke since they cast spells the fastest, Cure to a balanced character because they can walk away for a minute, and the other 2 characters do as you'd like. Cure always brings you back to full health, so the magic stat of the caster doesn't matter as long as they get a chance to use it. With Flaffy, he always healed pretty much as soon as I needed that, while my brother didn't heal as often as I would have liked. Of any of the 4 characters in this video, his had the most balanced stats, so he kept trying to help with heavy physical damage. At times I had it covered. Depending on your equipment and team composition, kinda decide who's using what. For example, the Selkies by far has the best focus attack, charges quickest, low recovery rates, and is normally a better choice than using their 3-hit combo. Now, that's not to say other tribes can't use the functions they don't specialize in. For example, the Lilties have fine enough focus attacks on most weapons. One that I particularly liked is this laser beam type thing that goes through enemies to the next one. However, you'd normally want your Liltie up front to divert enemy attention from your partners. Perform their base combo up front since it deals a lot of damage, gives enemies less time to stun you, and keeps them off your friends. I'd think of it like this. Your default response as a Selkie is focus attack, Yuke's is magic, Liltie's close range attacks, and Clavat's really depends on how you balance the stats. Then, depending on the situation and weapon, do something else. Are you a Liltie, but you still need to use your magic attack? Then yeah, use the magic attack. Crystal Chronicles 1 and all 4 of the action games for that matter want you paying more attention to your timing and choice of attack than fancy button inputs. Watch how long it takes for enemies to wind up their attack so you can find the right time to begin yours. Some enemies you can wail on them up front and then heal, while others you need to play a fancy game of footsies. For example, the normal goblins and slimes. They take so little damage and take a while to wind up their attacks. So walking up and mashing attack isn't gonna be a problem in small numbers. While with, say, the Chimera, a hard hitter that can cause multiple status ailments, you need to work smarter. Find the right distance to give yourself time to charge a focus attack or start attacking behind them while they're in the middle of their attacking animation. To a certain extent, I kind of feel like it still has that turn-based feeling in there, because once an enemy starts their attack animation, they are in that animation. They've started, say, their turn. While you, if you are charging an attack, which is most of your moves, are also locking into your turn. Also, because I don't know where else to say this, all of the monster designs actually come straight from Final Fantasy IX. Like, there's a few enemy designers credited on this game and Final Fantasy IX, and I kind of wonder if they even actually went to the office for Crystal Chronicles or just dropped off some paperwork. Anyways, what I've said with magic is only half the story so far, because with this next little magic mechanic, teamwork becomes even more important. So those reticles you have, using one by yourself does a regular attack or cast a spell. Cool. Well, you can also fuse them with your partner. Put in an attack spell with certain focus attacks, and you can add an elemental affinity to the main attack, while when fusing spells, you can make a whole new one. By fusing the same spell, you'd get what you expected from Final Fantasy. You know, Fira, Firaga, that kind of thing. Align 2 reticles, and there's your better spell. In my 2 runs, we didn't do this too much, since with Flaffy, I needed to divert attacks away from him, and as my Liltie, my magic stat was so shit that there was no point in doing it. However, once you're up to 3 or 4 players, you can pull this off way better. One guy can deal with enemies up close, while the others ready a big boom spell. Not something we got to do in my runs. I only used magic for causing status ailments and the unique attack spell fusions. The 2 main ones. When you fuse life with an attack, you can cast either slow or holy depending on the timing, while fusing 2 different attack magics cast gravity. Gravity cuts an enemy's health based on percentage, and holy causes damage like in the main FF games. If that's all they did, we wouldn't stop to use it, but there's one extra change. Gravity forces flying enemies who normally have a shit ton of health to fall to the floor for a long period of time. And Holy brings ghosts back to life, making them easier to kill. If you don't cast these spells on flyers or ghosts, they can take an eternity to kill. And I'm sure of that because, hey, guess who forgot that when he brought the new friend to play it? Fluffy and I played through the game over the course of a few months because he was moving and then started a new job. Because of that, our first few play sessions had a bit of a rush to it. And when we started, I had a confident feeling in my head of, oh, I remember everything. I'll skip the tutorials and not read the manual that I still own. So on our second play session, we started seeing ghosts and flyers, and we just accepted, holy fuck, these guys take a while to kill. Then before session 3, I talked to my brother and read the old manual and realized, oh shit, it's spelt out for you right there. So yeah, even if you have a Liltie with shit magic, there's a big incentive to make sure you have one attacking magic for some dungeons. As a Liltie, my strategy was to hold one attack magic, one Phoenix down that resurrects you when equipped, and once I had more item slots, I probably did more Phoenix downs or food. Speaking of food, that's a weird little mechanic in Crystal Chronicles. You can find a lot of different food types in Crystal Chronicles, from fruits, milk, bread, but they're not the most useful, especially not in multiplayer. All of them heal you a certain amount, and if it's a specific fruit, it temporarily raises your attack, defense, or magic stat. Given how many food types exist and how often you find them, I get the feeling they wanted you to use them often. The problem is that it takes a little too much time to do that versus using Cure. Because keep in mind, the only way you can use something is if it's already equipped to a command slot or from the item list on your GBA menu. In terms of healing, I think they wanted food to work as the faster alternative to using Cure. Cure requires a charge, while food does not. The reason it doesn't work like that is because when going through the menus in multiplayer mode, which don't pause the game, you use more time selecting it than it would have taken to wait on your friend to cast Cure. If you play on single player where you can pause the game and do menus at the same time, then I guess they have a little bit more use, but you also don't want them too much because you have limited inventory. And since they're so plentiful, you end up rapid fire dropping all of them once you realize you're out of space. With that said, in terms of world building, I do like the fruits they made here. They're all slightly different versions of real fruits. Rainbow grapes, striped apples, it has character, and I like that. When you begin, each character also has a favorite and least favorite food depending on tribe that you can change by making them eat it, which is neat. It yet again makes your character feel unique from each other. It's not just their stats to set them apart. Similar to you, they have foods they do and don't enjoy. It's a neat mechanic for world building and character creation, although I prefer it what the next game will do, where you pick up fruit mid-level and it instantly heals you. It maintains that charm of funny fruits while getting rid of the hassle of having 15 fruits taking up your limited inventory. It's better to keep those slots open for synthesis materials and the scrolls needed for blacksmiths to make them. So when talking mechanical design, I wouldn't say that Crystal Chronicles has the best dungeons ever. Some, such as this level, Conal Curich, is mostly a straight line until you reach the boss. Or there's Tita, which has a very annoying gimmick where you need to cast fire on these cobwebs to pass through. Cobwebs that respawn so quickly that you need a line already prepared as soon as you cast it. Mechanics like that get annoying, although there's still some that are pretty cool. Like Demon's Court. Here, you see the boss door right when you enter. Only problem, you can't enter because you need to find one key on each side of the dungeon to open the door, making you circle around where you know the boss is so that you can get in. Then there's Moshet Manor, where instead of walking to the boss himself, you need to kill his Tonberry minions within a few rooms to make him angry enough to fight you, forcing you to see the entire dungeon. I think it's cool. Not home runs, but cool. For mechanics, I guess the coolest part of them is how every dungeon scales in difficulty after you beat them. So I mentioned how you need the 3 drops of myrrh. Well, you also can't go to the same dungeon 2 years in a row, because after you've taken their myrrh, the tree needs to recharge. Then, once it does recharge, the dungeon itself has minor changes in design. More enemies, extra paths, and most importantly, better items. Particularly, your end level rewards. Yeah, I can't believe it took me this long to mention it for an RPG. Crystal Chronicles 1 doesn't have a traditional experience leveling system. Instead, what you do is find an artifact within a stage, fight the boss who will drop more artifacts, and then select one to keep with you when you leave. Some increase your heart or command slot number, while others improve either your attack, magic, or defense stats. Within a stage, it immediately improves the stat it's supposed to until you finish the dungeon. Then, what the boss drops depends on how well you did in the stage, such as how many items you picked up, how many enemies you killed, and if you followed the secret bonus prompt on your GBA screen. Prompts like don't use focus attacks or kill enemies with magic. This adds a minor arcade element that I think helps with replayability, because typically the boss drops better items if you have a higher score bonus, though sometimes you actually want a score somewhere in the middle. For example, the scrolls for most of the ultimate weapons necessitate a middle range score, which is really hard to gauge. You can't zoom through the dungeon, but you can't grind forever either. Anyways, you can only have one of each artifact. You can still pick up an artifact you already have mid-stage, though you can't keep it, meaning you have a maximum number for all of your stats. Stats which, for reference, you really just need to go up to the upper 60s for defense and attack to beat the game on 2-player mode, and with 3 or 4-player mode, you can probably go lower. This stat number matches up with the amount of times you'd probably want to replay the dungeons anyways. Dungeons change 3 times each, and it's unlikely you'll play every dungeon through to their 3rd cycle before you have confident stats to beat the game with. I still recommend going up to a 3rd cycle on a few, as how they change over the years makes the world feel a bit more alive than if everything stayed the same. Somewhere from the start of your journey has changed just as you have, even if you went away from it. It's great world building, which is where Crystal Chronicles strikes things out of the park. Those narrations I mentioned earlier do so much to make these stages come to life right before you enter it. For example, these 3 stages, Goblin Wall, Demon Demon's Court, and Moshet Manor. All three of these architectural structures are inhabited by monsters that work together, and between the three, it feels like we get a glimpse at different monster social classes. Goblin Wall has a dingy feeling, as though it's a communal home for goblins or maybe a military base. Demon's Court is a fancy Roman-styled coliseum with lizard men, and Moshet Manor is a regular-ass mansion owned by Eddie the Mean Old Yeti and his Lamia wife, complete with Tonberry chefs. These three stages give an idea that the monsters within the miasma have developed their own kind of society, perhaps as intelligent as the four tribes. Or maybe these places were made in one way by one of the tribes, and after the miasma took over or a crystal died out, the monsters moved in. Theory: you'll find Moshet Manor just south of Alphateria, so maybe a Lilty noble created it decades before with a personal crystal that he couldn't keep charged, resulting in the Yeti taking it over. It's a whole dungeon you can wonder about, and all of them are like this, giving you a world to theorize on. How do lizard men interact with goblins? Do they build everything themselves? And perhaps, what could happen if the miasma dissipated? Could that result in the mass extinction of all these species? There's so much here you can theorize, and even some other dungeons that get concrete answers in later games. Mainly, what I mean by that is Ra. Placement-wise, it's the closest to the final dungeon. That doesn't mean it's the last one you go to before then, but you'll at least have visited most places before this one. When you start here, the narrator tells of what's known to the tribes as the Golden Age, a time when every tribe lived in perfect harmony. No wars, no miasma, no monsters. Ra was their capital, until darkness came and choked their northern skies, which is a very interesting phrase for it. To us, that implies miasma, since it's what we know. However, that doesn't entirely rule out other factors. Did the Golden Age in Ra end because of the miasma? Or could it have ended in between these times? Yet again, I have my own little theory that I need the next two games for me to talk about, so hey, remember to subscribe and come back next month if you're watching this in parts. I just love the way lore is given here. It's like just the right amount of certainty to vagueness ratio where I can think up my own little headcanons about it. Like the mushroom forest I quickly mentioned earlier. What the fuck even was that? There's literally no answers to it. Is it miasma made and natural? We don't know. I'd love to sit here and say a bunch of ideas and theories about every location if the video wasn't already long enough. I still need to talk about the main story. Crystal Chronicles' main story unravels very slowly, as in some of it feels like side content, world-building fluff, until it all starts piecing together near the end. That's partially because of how most cutscenes occur. When you drive along the world map, you have some random encounters. Not random encounters with enemies, random encounters with other people on the road. You meet knights, thieves, and other caravanners. People who slowly unravel what's going on to you in the world. For example, my favorite dudes, the Striped Brigands. It's two Selkies and a purple Moogle that try and, normally fail, to steal valuable stuff from you. They pretty closely follow the Duronbo gang archetype. Proud leader, dim-witted dude, smart-ish third guy. Running into them seems a little scary at first, because they can actually steal items from you, though typically they just take fruit. I guess one time they stole an iron ore. That kinda sucked. My favorite scene is one of their last ones. They ambush you at a crossroad, demanding that you empty your pockets. Now the first time with Flaffy, I chose to run them over. Pretty fun scene where they lose. Then with my brother, I had a little thought. What if I don't run them over? Every other time they take something, it's just an apple, maybe an iron, and we were pretty far in, even a mithril doesn't mean much at this point. We lost all of our money, which we really needed at that point of the game. So don't give them money, run them the fuck over like any pedestrian. Who you run into the most are the other caravanners. You meet one from each town and they all feel like a reflection of how your caravan could operate. For example, the caravan from Alphateria consists of heavy armored lilties. They try to collect their myrrh as fast as possible and give the player some warnings. A perfect model caravan. However, it seems like they're not entirely enjoying the journey. They see it as their job that must be done as soon as possible, perhaps losing a personal personal aspect to it. An idea we see when their leader, Solrakh, leaves the caravan at the birth of his child. As a serious caravaner, he didn't have time for family, nor enjoy going on the journey. Then there's the duo from Liuda, two Selkies that seem to never have any myrrh on them. They slack off, have fun, put their town in danger, stuff you shouldn't do, showing that maybe taking too much time isn't right either. You need to find a balance, and find the parts of the game you like best, which some of the other caravans show. Looking at the Lilties from Mars Pass, they seem really keen on making and sharing weapons for combat, while the Ukes from Shella are really interested in the lore of the world and sharing their Ukish wisdom with us Titslanders. You don't have a wrong way to play the game. Anyways, these random encounter scenes also introduce three of the key characters relating to the main story. Hurdy, a Clavation preacher, Gertie, Hurdy's swindler brother, and the Black Knight, a Lilty warrior. All three have some problems going on. Let's start with the Black Knight because he's introduced first and you see all of his scenes pretty early. You initially hear about him from the Alphatarian Knights, gossiping about a rumored knight rampaging down the path. Someone that you and your friends should avoid. That caution increases by a run-in with the powerful Mars Pass caravan who got their asses kicked by the Black Knight. Then walk around Alphataria, you hear rumors about the Black Knight, that he's rampaged for years or one that Hurdy hired him as a bodyguard. However, when asked, Hurdy doesn't remember doing this. Or maybe Hurdy just doesn't want to associate with the Black Knight. This one little kid, who enjoys playing with spears like every little kid, claims that the Black Knight killed his father. Association with him could lead to impalement. Then, once you finally find him, he's acting, as the guide from 2006 put it, fairly schizo, slashing and stabbing the air with his weapon, pleading to some entity to stop eating his memories. An important line that clues you into the entirety of the main story. From here on, you might notice when villagers mention something relating to their memories. Some think they're becoming forgetful, others talk about how much they cherish their memories of their friends and family, and it seems like maybe there's some force out there stealing memories. Not a skinny blonde girl this time, though it did come out the same year as Chain of Memories in the West, which I find kind of funny. The rest of the experience stresses the theme of memories throughout multiple avenues. Obviously, you've had your Crystal Chronicles since the start, a book recording all of your actions, while other more subtle ones such as your interaction with family back home. At the end of each dungeon, you receive a letter. It can come from one of your family members, the town elder, or maybe even someone you met during the journey. Sometimes they check in on you, letting you know what they're up to, or maybe reminding you about something you did as a kid, like what foods you hated or the plants you used to keep growing. Then it's up to you to decide how to respond. If your mom says she misses you, say you miss her back. Dad sends you a fish in the mail, don't send the fish again. That last one's super important because depending on how your dad likes you also decides what gifts you receive at the start of each year, including high-level weapons depending on your dad's profession, which you can read a guide for. I don't need to go over everything. However, and I'm sorry to those that only played single player, the best implementation of this theme is with the multiplayer. Not a single part of Crystal Chronicles in-game will mean as much to me as the memories of playing Crystal Chronicles with my friends back then. Before I started this video, I told a few friends who don't even play much games anymore that I'm making this one, and they were so excited about it. Even Flaffy, who, like I said, wasn't a big fan of the game, has somewhat fond memories of playing it with me recently. It's about the journey you take together, starting at Tits Village with your friends, yelling at each other when someone's failing to cooperate, getting excited when your plan beats a boss. I would never want to give up those memories. And the other caravans we see likely feel the same. So how wretched must it feel for the Black Knight to forget his past? Perhaps Hurdy, who's normally preaching about the importance of memories, has also forgotten things. It becomes worse because this loss of memory, loss of their lessons, loss of purpose for the future leads to both of their faults. With the Black Knight, during one of his rampages, the young boy who lost his father finally strikes down the Black Knight, who, in his final breath, recognizes the boy's mother as his wife, telling us the sad reality that neither the boy or his mother will know. That boy struck down his amnesiac father, becoming more tragic when the diary entry your caravan writes at the end of the year reveals the boy never met his father. He had no memories of him, and perhaps avenging his father was his one way of making one memory to have with him. A goal that I guess he succeeded in. Now, Hurdy and Gurdy have a different story going on. Hurdy goes to various towns to preach about memories, miasma, banding together, and all the core themes of the story. Well, Gurdy is the biggest dickbag imaginable. You find him with the various other caravans on the overworld, and he's always trying to screw them over. For example, with the Ukes from Shella, he sells them an oval object for 5,000 gil that he promises is a model of the world. In reality, it's fucking bread. Anyways, Gurdy sucks. Like, he knows he's sketchy, and we can tell there's something underneath, something implying he might have a worth to society. Anytime you meet him, he ends with a horrible poem. It's sketchy, though it has a reason. He too lost his memories, but the results came out more twisted for him than with the Black Knights. You see, as theorized, Hurdy did hire the Black Knights. They traveled around to try solving the miasma problem as a whole and the sudden memory issues people were having, but in the process, lost it. For Hurdy, it resulted in him suffering a new split personality disorder. Some days he's Gurdy, others he's Hurdy. Something basically confirmed to us when one day we see Gurdy wearing Hurdy's clothes and he tells the player how he's never met Hurdy, sowing doubt that they're actually brothers. And the poems he recites, those are hints on how to reach the final area of the game, subtly telling us he's made this journey. Back on Lanari Island where the Selkie settle, there's a big ass desert. Here, if you perform a very obtuse puzzle related to Gurdy's verses where you need to cast magic spells on various parts of the stage, you can change your crystal element into unknown. Now, you can pass through any miasma stream. No more changing elements. This includes the final miasma stream that always required the unknown element, meaning as soon as you have this element, you can attempt fighting the final boss. And once you get there, you'll find a large green round mammal, a mysterious animal that survives in the miasma. He and their species are the only ones that live past here near the final dungeon, and that species is the carbuncles. Okay, if you've played any other Final Fantasy game or engaged with any media with a creature based on the actual South American myth, you'd know they don't really look like this. In Crystal Chronicles, they're a whole species of immortal mammals that hang around in this foggy structure. They lived through the Golden Age, miasma's rise, and into today. If you return here year by year, they'll tell you about the start of the miasma, which is also the same information you hear before the final boss in some diary entries and from a random Uke in Shella, so more likely than not, this information is not new to you. Long ago, the world didn't have multiple crystals in various settlements. Instead, they believe there to have only been one great crystal, which served a purpose we'll return to in Ring of Fates. One day, a meteor crashed, breaking the giant great crystal into the many shards and village-sized crystals that we see today, which isn't what caused the problem. What happened is that the meteor that struck also had a parasite that crawled out and began emitting the miasma. Due to that parasite, it caused the tribes to settle near crystal shards, monsters to thrive where miasma was thickest, and the carbuncles stayed in their home by the meteor's landing site. As the only species that lived through it and seemingly guardians of the crystals, they don't go too in-depth on that, they felt the need to stay close. Well, not the only species to survive. Moogles also survived, and Stiltskin, the Moogle who's in every game, theorizes that maybe Moogles share DNA with the carbuncle, since they both can live in the miasma. I'll come back to the Moogles in the next part. They're in every Crystal Chronicles game, because you know it's still Final Fantasy. The Carbuncle's lore dump, which I don't know if I should call it a dump because you need to visit them 6 times to hear it, does tell you what your final goal is gonna be. Kill the meteor parasite to end the spread of miasma, which I guess every other time you hear that story, it's just a fable, not something you believe you can fix.
Dear Mother, it is long since I have seen you. How have you been? There has been much hardship, but every time I reach a summit, splendid sights stretch out beneath me. That is what keeps me moving forward. Please take care. I will write again.
The final dungeon gets rough. Ignoring some third cycles, it's by far the hardest dungeon. Enemies here hit hard, so hard that it immediately gives you 4 cures, 4 lives, and a bunch of other spells. It's just telling you you're about to get whacked. On my run with Flaffy, we got fucked. We walked in with stats in the high 50s, not recommended, so we struggled. Like I said, on 2-player mode, you'll want that number in the high 60s, especially when you get to the Meteor Parasite himself. It has 3 phases where he constantly casts poison, his goons can freeze you, and his hitbox is very janky. It goes up and down in a Z-axis, which for a top-down RPG can get annoying. Thankfully, with a lot of reviving each other, we defeated the Meteor and ended the miasma. Miasma isn't the only problem we'll fix while we're here though. Immediately after destroying the meteor, we're transported to some LSD trip world. No real floor, we lost our chalice, land masses to the distance, nothing our caravan has seen before. We found ourselves in the Nest of Memories, a sort of pocket dimension created after the meteor hit the crystal. Here lives 2 entities, a positive floating bassist referred to as Lady Mio, and a negative dragon named Rhyme. Both of them consume memories to continue living. Lady Mio just eats a tiny bit to stay alive. You know, it leads to some people feeling a bit forgetful, but she's not leading anyone to insanity or total amnesia. She's trying to make sure that the important memories, the ones they want to recreate, strive to the future for, still subside in their brain. While Rhyme eats any memory he sees, including those of the last duo that faced him, Hurdy and the Black Knights. Rame only cares to indulge himself, and you need to put a stop to it. Right after a rather long quiz show with memory doors, did I mention Chain of Memories came out this year, you get to fight Rame. A tough battle not exactly because of the mechanics, but because you have to watch the very long cutscene again right before if you die. As long as you have one person deal with his goons as soon as they respawn, and probably double them as the healer, you'll beat him eventually. Now his second phase, that's where things get interesting. At this point, he fuses with Lady Mio to become Memi-Roa. Memi-Roa, while slow, can deal a shit ton of damage. 2 hits to die at Flaffy and I's stats, which is double why you want Cure and Life ready on both your party members. But more than that, you need Cure ready to save your memories. So you might have noticed that memory number. That has always been on your GBA screen. It served no functions for the whole game until now. Memi-Roa slowly pulls memories from the player's mind, manifesting them as your family or people you met on your journey. And when he pulls them out, your memory stat goes down permanently. As in, even when you die and respawn, the memory stat doesn't come back. He's using your memories as an attack against you. So what you need to do is cure that memory and gain a triple question mark command so that you can use your memories against him, because these commands when used cast either a high level magic spell or gives you invincibility, allowing you to defeat Memi-Roa with the use of your memories. Every moment you shared with those you met counts for the end of your journey, which is such a great way to use the core theme in your final encounter. It makes everything you did from this dungeon that year, this guy you met then, that uke looking at this bread, count for your final battle. With Memi-Roa's defeat, Lady Mio and Rame are put into what she calls a deep sleep, perhaps meaning death. With their death as well as the meteor, the miasma dissipates, and the memory problem will come to an end. While the memories devoured are still gone, everyone still has a chance to create new ones. New memories that outside forces won't interfere with. Your caravan has saved the world. And perhaps the saddest part is that the memory of how these problems ceased will stay with your caravan. No one sent you on the journey, and no one knew it could happen. You and your friends were just some random caravanners the same as anyone else, who just so happened to, on this year, stop the need for the caravanning. And with that, the entire world is going to change. Change based on how the 4 tribes react to this post-miasma world. And that change is up to anyone's guess, because that's where the story ends. Only you and your friends remember this story, and maybe those that read your Crystal Chronicle. After you beat the boss and see the credits, the original Crystal Chronicles hard ended right there. You don't save or anything after the credits finish. Turn the game off, and when you boot it back up on another day, you're back to before you ventured into the final dungeon. In the original release, the new version has a post-game I'll get to. I can't really recommend Crystal Chronicles to everyone. Like I said, even Flaffy, who's a huge fan of other RPGs like Dragon Quest and Diablo, wasn't a fan of it, and me forgetting some mechanics combined with Dolphin Netplay freezing sections definitely didn't help him get into it. However, when I think of my experiences with Crystal Chronicles, I'm not thinking of the dungeon layouts or basic battle system. When I think of Crystal Chronicles, I think of the fun times with friends. Creating our own caravan, laughing together, quickly trading who had which GBA cable so they could charge. It's a memory I'll cherish, and it's disappointing that it's difficult to share that with others today. It's almost like the game's themes have come to life. Sure, I still have these vague memories in my head, but I can't share them. They're just stuck in my own little diary. Now, if you want to play the game today, especially with friends online, Dolphin's Netplay is definitely a good alternative. It's just that there's something about playing on those tiny GBAs that I miss. It was a unique experience that they really could have replicated with mobile phones in the new remaster. And yeah, I guess it's time to talk about the Crystal Chronicles remaster. I debated if I'd talk about it now or after Crystal Bears, and since I broke this up into parts, I think it makes the most sense to talk about it now. So the remaster came out in 2020. By then, I planned to start grad school, and I was already making YouTube videos. In fact, if you look back at my Final Fantasy VII Remake video, I think, I made a joke about how I'm gonna finally be able to throw away those link cables. Whoops. So I lived a lot of life between the OG and the remaster. When they showed it off, I got super excited. It promised online crossplay on Switch, PS4, Android, and iPhones. Widescreen, new character customization, higher quality audio, voice acting, higher resolution, a lot of things that I was excited to share with my friends who never played the game. A little disappointed when I heard they removed local multiplayer, but hey, it also has phone releases. I could play on PS4 with the TV, my brother on Switch, and maybe connect controllers to 2 other friends' phones if we have a full local 4-player game going. In the trailers and stuff, I had no reason to worry, especially with the graphics. Like, y'all have probably noticed that I've used some of the remastered cutscenes while editing. Then it comes out. I hyped it up to multiple friends, and it has a huge problem. The multiplayer is dog shit. So you know how in the original you all start from the same town and journey together for a whole quest? That's not what happens here. Instead, you come from your own village in your own game, while your friends come from their own village in their own game. The only time you'll share a party is during a dungeon, which I found lame, but okay. We can just stay coordinated, tell each other when we go to a town, and once we feel ready for a dungeon, then we link up. Then the big other problem. Only player 1 receives myrrh when online, meaning if you start the game with 3 other friends, you have to play 4 times as many dungeons to finish a given year. And in the first 2 years, where you have a very limited number of dungeons you can go to, that's not fun. I remember the day it came out, we finished Mushroom Forest for the 2nd time, and my friend said to me, "Roman, I'm not having fun." And you know what? I couldn't blame him. I did not recognize this multiplayer experience. I didn't want to share this one. Thankfully, only I had bought the game at that point because there was a trial version, but I was still bummed out. Probably my biggest gaming disappointment since the triple Mega Man cancellation of 2011. So I put the remaster down ever since then and accepted that I wasted $30. However, my brother gave it a full run in single player mode with me watching some of it, so I'll go over the additions I haven't mentioned, plus the differences between single and multiplayer mode. While I still don't recommend Crystal Chronicles single player mode as a first experience, the remaster does provide you the best way to play that. 1, for all the presentation related reasons I mentioned before. Those can make the world pop, especially because it all looks a little bit brighter. And 2, they got rid of the limited inventory. Even though I didn't mention it much, I want to stress that the limited inventory in Crystal Chronicles can get annoying. You don't know what synthesis materials you need at what point, you grab a lot of items during 3rd cycles, and that results in at least one party member needing to slow down and rearrange their inventory during late game dungeons. You can only get around that with extreme planning, something that Flaffy, who never played the game before, couldn't really do, so he had a lot of items at all times. They also added bonus post-game dungeons, turbo hard versions of the existing dungeons with extra enemies that hit you way harder. Only problem is that they're balanced to fuck you hard in single player, and good fucking luck convincing a friend to play the entire game on their own just for these dungeons. dungeons. Or perhaps even less likely, finding randos wanting to crawl the same dungeons as you in a poorly reviewed remaster 3 years after release. Besides those things, which do not beat out the original for me, there's not much I feel the need to say. There's new costumes based on these characters from later Crystal Chronicles games, but I haven't talked about those yet, so y'all don't care at the moment. Now, for what's changed in single player, and this goes for both versions of the game, it's not a whole lot, but it's aspects that alter your entire play method. First off, by nature of going it alone, you need to totally change your plan of attack. Ukes and lilties become a lot less appealing because you need to have worthwhile physical attack and magic attack. You're also gonna have to play more cautiously. You can't have anyone dedicate their role to support or dedicate their role to attack when you need to do both. It makes large enemies, and especially bosses, take a lot longer. We do have a few positives in single player. For one, everything pauses when you open your menu, so using instant consumables like fruit and milk has more merit than in multiplayer where they take a long time. You also have a Moogle companion that carries your chalice and sometimes casts a spell with you. Because of him, the walking between fights speeds up a little bit. It doesn't make up for the time lost for fights taking longer, but hey, it balances things a little. And the last change worth mentioning involves the spell fusion. Obviously, you only have your own reticle, so no one's there to fuse magic with you, which for the flyers and ghosts, including 2 ghost bosses I forgot to mention, it'd be agonizing without Holy and Gravity. Thankfully, you get a choice on fusing spells in your menu, thus casting Gravity with 1 reticle rather than 2. Downside to it, you're using 2 command slots, and you need to unfuse to use what's required to cast Gravity, so this is definitely just a workaround. And besides minor stuff, that's all the changes in single player. Again, I'm a much bigger fan of the multiplayer in Crystal Chronicles, and there's a lot of single player Final Fantasies I'd recommend over this, including our next game, but there is still some merit in Crystal Chronicles single player. A note my brother wanted me to mention before I'm done with the original game is about the emotion of single player. In multiplayer, you have a feeling of camaraderie. Your caravan is on a journey together. Even the characters you don't use kind of feel like a part of your journey. You see them on the menu and their families back home. Additionally, by the nature of other humans playing the game with you, you have the natural, loud feeling of being with someone. While with single player, you have a new feeling of loneliness. No one has your back when you crawl through a brand new dungeon. If your character dies here, who's to say that someone else will go in looking for you? So if you want an emotion kinda like that, then maybe you do have a reason for single player. However, that's where I'm going to close the book on the original game. The story of Roman, Flaffy, the second Roman, Bryce, and Tits Village comes to a close. With improvements in modern netplay and emulation, I hope to share this experience with more friends. But for now, we must place this Crystal Chronicle back on the shelf.